In this video, I want to talk about transfers. What I mean by transfers, it's just a fancy word for how to get from point A to point B. For example, I'm sitting here on the bed, and a transfer could be from, say, the bed to the chair, or the chair and back. And this chair can also be something else too. For example, it could be a wheelchair, it could be a commode for toileting, it could be a sofa, or it can just be any other surface. Maybe even like, showering and taking a bath, right? Some people have a shower bench in their shower. So any surface to another surface can be considered a transfer. And the act of actually transferring itself is really, really quick. So yeah, I can demonstrate how to transfer to the chair, but of course, it takes a lot of preparation and knowledge and planning before you actually do the transfer, either for yourself as a patient, for someone who's had a stroke, or if you're a caregiver, helping someone who's had a stroke, like your family member or friend, get from point A to point B. And an analogy I thought of is kind of like when engineers demo a building, right? The actual act of demoing the building is like really, really quick. But to plan ahead, you need to consider the environment, if things are safe, right? You need to consult with the engineer, get permits, do a lot of these days they probably do like simulations and just so much calculation and planning that goes into it, because you kind of get one chance to do it. And if you screw things up, people can get hurt, right? So not trying to scare you guys in this video, but just really drilling home the point to take your time and to plan. And the more that you do it, and the more that you practice, either yourself as a patient or as a caregiver helping someone else, then it goes more smoother, right? So these are the things that affect how one person transfers from point A to point B. And the first is basically the person themselves, like me, the stroke survivor. An example is, am I really sleepy? Am I really sleep deprived? Is it in the middle of the night? I'm trying to transfer onto a commode. That's the person, right? Or am I even really angry and agitated at my helper or caregiver who's really trying to help me, right? That's more than likely going to lead to less success, people being less happy, and those around me, right? Just overall not as good. The second is the environment. And that's a pretty important consideration, because how the environment is set up really makes a big difference. Even if it's just the slightest little thing, it can make the world of a difference for someone who's had a stroke, who can use every advantage that they can get to do something as simple as going from point A to point B. And when I talk about environment, the thing about the video and what's unfortunate about me teaching you guys over on YouTube is everyone's environment is different. I have a specific setup in this room. So that's also another thing, I guess a reason why I'm talking about it in this video, is to kind of go over the points so that I can give really general information, so that you, the person who's watching on the other side of the internet from this YouTube video, can apply this knowledge and apply problem solving and just figuring out what works best for you, so that you can do it the best way possible, the safest way possible. And also very important is to spend as least amount of energy as possible to do something as simple, I say simple, right? As going from point A to point B. So with that said, let's just get right into it. So the first consideration is how soft or hard your bed is. And you may be thinking, well, Jeff, I can't really change that. Are you gonna ask me to buy a new bed? Well, not necessarily, but there are some people, for example, who have, the sleep number bed, right? And you can change the softness and firmness of that. So for those of you who have an adjustable bed, either if it's a blow up mattress that's specialized like a hospital bed, or if you have a sleep number bed, you have the ability to change the firmness. The more firm the surface is, the easier it is to go from point A to point B, right? Imagine a hard bench at a park versus a sofa, right? It's much more harder to get off from that sofa versus getting up from a bench. So now you may notice that there's magically a pillow under my left leg and my left thigh, right? Sometimes after a stroke, for some patients, they may experience what's called left inattention. And that results in really poor awareness of what's going on with their left side of their body, as well as what goes on in the left side of the world. Pay attention to your surroundings and look around you, because, for example, you may not notice, as you are just really focused on getting from point A to point B, that maybe you're on top of something that may be really soft, like this pillow that can be really squishy and slippery. So if that's the case for you, then, like lean off of it and remove it and put it somewhere out of your way. So that's how you can really adjust your softness of where you're coming from. But remember how we talk about a transfer is from point A to point B? So your destination surface is, for example, for me, would be this chair, right? This chair is actually quite firm. I wouldn't like personally sit on it and do like video editing on it for a long time, but that works to your advantage if you're not going to sit on it for at least for a long time, in that it's easier to get up and off from. So that's kind of like a balance, right? The balance would be comfort, which is softer things are generally more comfortable. Think about a sofa, versus like a bench or something firmer would be easier to get up on and off from. And if given the lesser of the two evils, I would probably personally pick, if I had a stroke, what makes it easier for me to get from point A to point B, and that's the firmness. So with that said, this is just one chair. If you have like 5 types of chairs, one of those people who have like many different types of chairs, I don't know, in your house around, then consider getting a more firmer type of chair. The second consideration when transferring, before you even transfer and when you're planning things out, is the height. So a really simple concept to remember here is gravity, right? Things go from higher up to lower down. So here I am basically on a bed, and I would actually call it pretty high. So much the fact that, I'm like almost 6 feet tall, and I'm sitting on the very edge of the bed, and still, you probably can't see on video, but my feet are still dangling, and there's like several inches between the bottom of my heel and the ground. The higher that you are in general, the easier it is to get from that surface to something that's lower, right? That makes sense. Go from high to low, and it's much easier that way. Transferring is not just going from point A to point B, because that's not how we live our lives, right? We don't just go to point B and just call it a day. We may go from point B back to point A. So in this example, it would be, for example, coming from this bed to the chair, and then when I'm done, like, I don't know, watching TV in this chair, then I would go back into bed. Or it could be something entirely different. I go from point A, this bed, to point B, this chair, to maybe point C, like a wheelchair. Or maybe I go take a shower, right? So I walk and transfer to a shower bench. So that's point C, right? All these surfaces have different heights. So you can notice right here in this video that this bed is, I would call it significantly higher actually than this chair. So what that means is when I transfer from my bed to the chair, it's going to be pretty easy because I'm going from a higher surface to a lower surface, right? So for example, pretty easy. Okay, you can give yourself a pat on your back. That was easy. But now one common mistake is people don't think about how they're going to go back to where they came from. And this is a higher surface. So, oh shoot, this is going to be much harder. It's going to take a lot more effort, energy. It might even be impossible for you. So one thing you can do is consider, like just how we swapped out the chair for different firmnesses, consider adjusting the heights. And you can play with the heights from point A and point B. So if for some of you, you have beds that can raise or lower, then you can raise the bed and make it so that you kind of like fall down, sort of. Fall down, I don't mean like fall, but kind of roll down, slide down with gravity to the lower surface, right? And then when you're done, you can maybe lower the bed so that it's lower than the chair. Or to make your life easier, one thing you can just do for the surfaces if you can is to match the height. So for example, having or finding a chair that's approximately, it doesn't have to be exact, approximately the same height as one surface to another. And that makes it so that it's basically like a smooth kind of change and shift from one surface to the other, right? It's not going to be a big shift. Because yeah, you can also, going off that height thing, make it like really big drop from like point A, like my bed to my chair. But that's kind of like scary, right? And that's kind of like a big difference, and more that basically your body has to move from one height level to the other. Whereas if it's a kind of matched more or less, then it'll be basically less that your body will have to move in terms of like height differential. And the less that your body has to move, then the less work that you have to do. And the less kind of scary it is, especially when you first start out transferring. The third consideration, which is kind of similar based on the concept of the second one, is just like how you have the height of in between the surfaces. The third is the gap, right? If you close the gap, the easier it will be. It'll be kind of very seamless. Whereas if you kind of just don't plan it out and you have, say, the chair like pretty far away, and pretty common sense, right? It's going to be much more difficult to get from point A to point B. And after a stroke, you want to make your life, at least in the very beginning when you first getting comfortable, practicing, training, doing rehab with transfers, especially when you have to do things like go to the bathroom and you have, no time to waste, right? You want to make your life as easy as possible. So either for yourself, you can bring the chair closer, or whatever it is, like a wheelchair, bench, or to have a caregiver help you. So a lot of times, like when I'm doing like family training for patients who are about to go home from the hospital who have had a stroke is, look, the actual time it takes to do a transfer doesn't take very long, but the planning ahead, the considerations takes even longer, and it should take much longer in the very beginning at least, until you get very comfortable and things become very second nature to you. This chair basically doesn't have any armrests, but for example, some chairs do have armrests, so that may be in the way of me, right? Or if I have a wheelchair, if there's an armrest there, then typically for those types, you can swing them away or remove them, right? Does that mean that you should try and get a chair like this that doesn't have an armrest? Well, it's kind of like good and the bad. If you don't have an armrest, then you have nothing to reach for. So for example, if I were to go into this chair, I could either reach for like the backrest, or I can reach for the bottom of the chair. But a lot of times it may be beneficial, right? That's why grab bars were invented for like handicap spots in like the bathroom, like those bars, right? Is to have something to grab onto. Some of you may even have those installed in your house already, or you may be in a facility that has them, or you used them before. They are very handy. And the same applies to like a armrest or something you can grab onto that's made for that, such as in a wheelchair or a chair. So what do you do, for example, in cases where you have a chair and like this, like, I'm not telling you all to buy a chair that looks like this, like, what if you want to use what you have in your environment first, right? What if you have a chair that has like a really bulky armrest that gets in the way? Just for that situation, you probably don't want to have it like right up against you, because you're going to make it a little bit more difficult and you may have to go over it. So it may actually benefit you to kind of angle it so that the armrest is away from you, just a little bit. So it depends, because every chair is different. You want to really kind of plan about it, and you really need to know how you'll probably move too, because if you're able to, for example, clear and go over that surface, then you may be able to get away with like having it still like that and going over that armrest. Whereas if you know you're not going to do a really high clearance and you're kind of just going to run into it, for example, then it may benefit you to kind of angle it. Okay, the fourth one, I should probably have mentioned this very beginning, and I didn't, but I'm going to put that in because it's very important, and it's to make sure that things are locked. And this one's pretty kind of intuitive, common sense. So a lot of times when I do caregiver training, for example, with family members, they, for example, may forget to lock the wheelchair. So when the patient is reaching for it, it may slide away, or even if they reach for it, it's like pretty steady. By the time they kind of sit down, maybe they bump into it and it can get away from them. It can get really, really dicey, right? So along that point, locking things, it's not just where you're going. It's also, and you occupational therapists who are watching this, especially need to remember where your patient is coming from, or where you're coming from, or where your family member or friend is coming from, such as the bed that I'm sitting on, also needs to be locked too. Because believe it or not, some beds have locks, like such as hospital beds, and they can become unlocked. And you wouldn't know, right? If you're in the bed, you're like moving around, but the bed's not going to move. But when you're kind of scooting around and sliding off the bed and putting pressure and kicking off of it, that's when it can get away from you, right? So point A, point B, both surfaces, make sure that they're locked, or at the very least, not going to slide out from you. Take proper precautions. Also make sure that the ground is clear and there are no obstacles in the way. A notorious thing that is commonly a risk for tripping people are like charger cords, like your iPhone cable, right? Those things can like get really caught up under your leg, and you don't even know until you actually may be too late. And the very, very last point, which is probably the hardest one, kind of problem solve, is which direction do you go towards? What I mean by that? Well, after a stroke, for example, as indicated by this on my arm, if I had a stroke that affects this side, it's going to be more difficult for me to go towards this side because I don't have as good motor control, muscle control of this side. Conversely, I can move towards in this example for the stroke that affected my left side more, then my right side isn't as affected as much, right? So I can easily go towards my right, no problem, right? So you may be thinking, well, if I'm trying to get into this chair, then yeah, I'm going to want to position the chair to be on this side because I can get in this chair easier, right? Pretty simple. Just going to slide over. Okay, that's great and all, but how am I going to go back to this bed? Given that even if it's like really close to me, let's imagine it's even like the same level and matched in height. It's going to be really difficult for me to go towards my stroke side, my left side that has been affected. Basically because I can't really lead with the side, I don't have a power arm. I can kind of push off, but then my arm is kind of getting in the way, especially those of you who have your arms and legs that aren't as strong as they once were and you haven't gotten the full functionality of it back quite yet. It's going to be hard, right? Yeah, so that's great and all. I transferred to this chair, but then with a stroke, right, I have one side that's stronger than the other. And unfortunately, in this scenario, in this situation, if my goal is to get back into the bed, my stroke side is going to be more difficult to kind of lead towards. Now add to this fatigue and being tired. For example, maybe you sat in a chair for a really long time, or maybe imagine I'm sitting on a commode and I put a lot of energy into going to the bathroom, right? So not only is it harder to go towards my stroke side, but now I'm even more tired, then it's going to be very, very difficult. And either I'm going to have to ask for help or I'm going to have to change the way that I get back into the bed. One thing you can do is, for example, now if you imagine that I'm in a wheelchair, then yeah, I can make things easier and go towards my strong side actually. So what I can do is I can flip it so that I am facing the opposite direction. So just imagine this is a wheelchair. So if you imagine that I'm in a wheelchair, not a regular chair, and I flip myself around, then yeah, this would actually be the next best thing given that scenario that I kind of was stuck in, so to speak, because I can now go towards my strong side easier, and then I can easily kind of pull towards it. Even though this is going to be really high, I'm not going to be able to basically do it the same way as easier because this is a higher surface, but it's going to be a world of a difference as opposed to going towards my stroke side because I have strength, for example, to like pull up and sit up. So that's one consideration, the direction that you go in. So does that mean, well, Jeff, you're saying that I should always transfer towards my strong side and like go into like a circle? So if my, for example, right side is my stronger side, I can only go in this direction like all the time and I only should go in this direction? Well, no, because then you're not promoting your function going towards your weaker side, so to speak. Because with stroke recovery, not only is repetition important, but using both sides of our body, but not only that, going towards both directions and in all directions, kind of like how you would normally move, is ultimately our goal, right? To be as normal as possible. And that includes going towards our stroke side. So yeah, in the very beginning, if for those of you who are like really weak, some therapists may even do this, is they tend to kind of go towards your strong side. On the flip side, recovery also means going towards your weaker side and starting with that. So for example, if I were to go on the commode and I know that I want to be much more tired coming back from the commode and I want to practice going towards both sides, then it may be more worthwhile to flip the chair so that, I said chair, but I mean commode, so that, for example, in the beginning when I have the most energy, I can go towards my weaker side and then go on, do my business with, let's say, a commode. And then when I'm done using like the bathroom, for example, I'm more likely to be more fatigued, right? And then it makes more sense for me then at that point, after to go from point B to point A, such as the commode to bed, to then go towards my stronger side. So you see what I'm saying, how in terms of where you're putting things relative to you and your environment, going towards your left side or your right side, it really depends. And there's no one size fits all answer. You have to think about ultimately going from point B to point A or point B to point C. It could be that very well that after I get onto, say, the commode, I'm going to get into the wheelchair and go for some fresh air, right? And then the benefit of, say, like a wheelchair is that you can unlock it and you can put it anywhere you want. So then if you want to make your life as easy as possible, then yeah, you want to, say, for example, transfer towards your stronger side right here. And then it doesn't really matter from there going into the wheelchair because then you can put the wheelchair to the right of that. So what should you do in the long term? And that's the practice going towards both sides. What I'm trying to say is kind of plan so that you don't get stuck, but also try and practice going towards both sides. And it's not impossible. It's definitely doable. And just like how transferring takes a lot of planning and consideration, going towards your weaker side is definitely doable. We do it all the time as therapists, as physical therapists, as occupational therapists, what I am. It does not mean that you can't go towards one side and you're kind of stuck living your life going one direction. Like that band, that pop band that was called One Direction. If you found this video helpful, as this is YouTube, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And thank you all so much for watching. Let me know if this helps. Have a nice day and good luck with your recovery.